It's college recommendation letter season again, and I know how overwhelming this can be. Unlike my other videos, this one is specifically designed for high school teachers who are asked to write letters of recommendation for the college admissions process. Hey there, teachers. My name is Andrew Hoffman, and I've worked for selective college admissions for the last 15 years. I've read tens of thousands of recommendation letters, and I'm here to give you the real deal. In this video, I'll share what really makes a recommendation letter stand out, and how to do that efficiently and effectively. Whether you're a classroom teacher, a school counselor, or anyone helping students with the college admissions process, this is for you. Let's dive in. So first, why do these recommendation letters even matter? Colleges do read them, even if you don't think so. And this is especially true for selective and highly selective colleges and universities. They often provide context for grades and extenuating circumstances, evidence of growth, as well as character traits. They are not optional fluff. They really give insight into the student and either confirm what we already know from other evidence in the file, or raise questions that we haven't yet considered. In short, we're looking for what type of community member the student's going to be, in the classroom, as a roommate, and as a future alum. Now let's talk logistics. If you're new to high school teaching, this section is absolutely for you. Letters of recommendation are submitted in the college admissions process, typically to more selective colleges. There are some public colleges and universities, as well as less selective private ones, that request letters of recommendation, but they're probably most important for selective and highly selective colleges. I think teachers who teach juniors and seniors are probably the most popular letter writers. I always encourage students to think about those teachers who may have taught them in more than one class to sort of show that growth. Just not sure how often students are really taking that advice. While requests for letters can come in at multiple points during the year, most popular is probably right when students are getting back from summer holidays. The most diligent and prepared students might be requesting letters before the summer holidays begin, and then you sort of have to make a decision as a teacher if you want to spend part of your summer writing letters of recommendation. College application deadlines are usually bunched in November for early decision and early action, and the very beginning of January for regular decision. In addition to your letter, the student will most likely have a letter from their school counselor or college counselor. Yours might be the only letter of recommendation from a teacher. They might have another required letter, and they might be submitting additional optional letters of recommendation as well. Now, the most popular way to apply to college is through the Common application, which is an online platform that has hundreds and hundreds of colleges as members. There are some other platforms like the Common Black College application, QuestBridge, or the Coalition application, so you might be interacting with multiple platforms. Regardless of the platform, the system is probably pretty straightforward. After the student seeks your permission and asks you to write a letter of recommendation, they'll input your name and email address into their recommendation portal. You'll then receive an email asking you to submit a letter of recommendation. You'll probably complete a short questionnaire asking you which classes you teach at the school, or maybe what specifically you're teaching this student. And it'll also have an area where you can actually type out a narrative letter, or most commonly, upload a letter of recommendation from Google Docs or PDFs. You will then have an optional section on most of the platforms where you compare your student to other students that you've taught based on different dimensions, and those dimensions could be academic ability or problem-solving skills. There's usually 10, 15, maybe even 20 categories. Another logistical point is that your student has the ability to either waive their FERPA rights or not waive their FERPA rights, and that's completely up to them. You will know that information before writing that letter of recommendation. If they waive their rights, and most students do in this process, they will never be able to read your letter of recommendation. If they don't waive their rights, then when they enroll in college, they can go to the admissions office and request to see their application file, and they will be able to see your letter. Maybe it won't matter to you at that point now that they're in college, but maybe it does. I think the best course of action, obviously, is to write a really honest letter and have the student waive their rights, but at the end of the day, it's their rights. And finally, deadlines. So colleges understand that supporting materials, such as letters of recommendation, high school transcript, counselor letter of recommendation, can often come in after the application deadline. That's generally fine, especially if it's for regular decision. If your student is applying early decision or early action, typically admission officers are going to be reading those applications the day after or maybe a couple of days after that deadline. It's best to get those early letters in as close to that deadline as possible. And feel free to ask your student for all the colleges to which they're applying and those deadlines so that you can keep track of that. Your letter, by the way, is likely going to go to multiple colleges and universities, so you want to write this in a general way. You don't want to write it to Princeton's Office of Undergraduate Admissions. So now the meat of the letter. What do admission officers actually look for? for? This really depends sometimes on the college, which is obviously challenging because your student is most likely applying to multiple colleges and your letter is going to those multiple colleges. But every college has a different mission and a set of criteria. We often call these institutional priorities, but in general, college admission officers are looking for evidence of intellectual curiosity, resilience, kindness and collaboration with others, leadership, initiative, drive, and growth. That list isn't exhaustive, by the way, but those are probably the highlights. But how do you do this in a narrative letter form? The less effective way is by saying she's resilient. The more effective way is to show how she is resilient. For example, you can say, faced with a daunting group project, with interpersonal conflict beyond Jessica's control, she really stepped up into the leadership position and gained the respect from this disparate group of students. And you don't want to just say he's hardworking, you want to show this in possible examples or anecdotes. It could be just a few sentences, or it could be an entire paragraph if that trait is maybe one of the most important traits that you can convey about that student. Now, what are admissions officers not looking for? Letters that read like a resume recap. It's just not helpful. By the time admission officers are reading your letter, they've already gotten through the extracurricular list of activities, honors and awards, most likely the counselor letter of recommendation, maybe the college essay and the supplement. So you're pretty much at the end of that road. Unless you're an advisor or a coach in maybe another context beyond classroom teaching, feel free to just leave off the extracurricular activities and clubs. The possible exception to this rule is that if you think your student isn't accurately describing their outside of the classroom responsibilities. For example, if you know your student holds down a significant part-time job outside of school and is holding down a challenging course schedule, you can mention that. You don't need to go into what the student does in their work responsibilities. We just find oftentimes on the admission side that students aren't usually talking about their part-time job responsibilities. The same goes for home responsibilities, where maybe students are taking care of younger siblings, or maybe they're translating for their parents who don't speak much English. Use your judgment, obviously, on whether or not you want to include this in your letter. And just remember, the counselor letter of recommendation might also serve this purpose, so feel free to have a chat with the counselor. Admission officers also don't need the typical 4-paragraph letter. I've read thousands and thousands of letters that use this structure. First paragraph, John is a Renaissance man. He does everything very well, and you'd be lucky to enroll him. Second paragraph, John's GPA, rank in class, and test scores speak for themselves. Not only is he enrolled in my AP Physics course, but he's enrolled in BC Calculus, AP English, etc., etc. Third paragraph, and John's hard work doesn't stop at my classroom door. He's also involved in the lacrosse team, basketball team, and the technology club. Final paragraph, in summary, John's an excellent student and would be a fantastic community member at your prestigious institution. You see how that form letter can get old really quickly, and it really doesn't tell us anything about John that we don't already know. Now here are the 5 elements that make a letter of recommendation really strong. Context. How do you know this student? How long and in what classes did you teach them? If you're not teaching classes, in what way do you know this student? Is there anything unique or rather unusual about this? For example, perhaps you're a long-time substitute and the former teacher resigned after just a few weeks in the school year, and now you are trying to teach an AP curriculum. That might be really important context to convey to the admissions office. 2, character insight. What kind of person is this student? Are they kind, empathetic? Do they go out of their way to help others who might be struggling with the lesson? Are they a quiet leader? Maybe they don't raise their hand very often, but when they do, their peers really listen to them because they've really thought about what they're going to say. Are they competitive? Do they work tirelessly to learn from their mistakes? These personality traits and character traits will really help the reader understand who the student is. 3, specific examples. I mentioned this before, but those stories and anecdotes can really showcase what that adjective really is in sort of narrative form. Use the show, don't tell us framework. Instead of saying Maya is a natural leader, you might say, when our class project hit a roadblock, Maya really stepped up to organize an after-school session, not because she had to, but she wanted the group to succeed. Again, it doesn't have to be a long story, but those examples will really help showcase who that student is rather than just using the adjectives. 4, growth or impact. Have you taught them in more than one class? Maybe they were in your sophomore honors biology class and now they're a senior and they're in your AP biology. What has that growth looked like? And by the way, that's not just they got a B in my sophomore biology class, now they have an A in AP biology. Talk about maybe a concept that they've mastered over time. Or maybe their growth and impact has looked a little different. Had they helped others become better students? Maybe when they were in your sophomore biology class, they relied on upperclassmen for help, and now they are the upperclassmen to help others. 5. The checkboxes really help us as admission officers. On the Common App, there are about 15 different categories where you're measuring your student compared to other students that you teach or have taught in the past. If you're being honest, admission officers can learn a ton from just these checkboxes. Use these checkboxes in important strategic ways to bolster what you've already revealed in your letter. Here are some common pitfalls to avoid. The overuse of clichés, like he's a pleasure to have in class, or she goes above and beyond. We see that all the time. Writing the same letter for multiple students, but swapping out the student's name. I think admission officers would rather you just tell your student, I'm too busy to write letters of recommendation, or I've hit my limit. I've read letters for twins, for example, where literally only the name was different. I called up that teacher and I said, I really need your help to really differentiate these two individuals. And the teacher basically said they're practically the same person. It just is not helpful. Another pitfall is making the letter of recommendation too short, and I'm talking like a paragraph, or too long, which is certainly over 2 pages. Even for the most exceptional students in your career, you honestly should be able to tell everything that you need to tell in under 2 pages. But also don't worry if it's less than a page. If you get right to the heart of who the student is right away without all the fluff, you can actually do this very effectively. Focusing too much on grades and test scores can also be a pitfall because we've already seen the transcript. And finally, being too vague and not using enough examples. So she participates well versus she regularly led classroom conversations and had thoughtful questions. The second sentence is stronger, certainly, than the first, but I'm probably going to forget the second sentence about 5 seconds after reading it. Now, we know you are busy people, and I cannot imagine being a classroom teacher, quite honestly. So here are some time-saving tips for you. Use a questionnaire or brag sheet for your students, but instead of asking for a resume or asking for what clubs and activities they really enjoy, ask them about maybe some of their favorite assignments or favorite moments from your class, or maybe some projects that challenge them. You can set up a letter template of sorts, just remember to really personalize it for your student. For example, you might always want to include a paragraph on growth or improvement for each of your students, because that's just important to your teaching methods, either big or small. You likely already do this, but also keep notes or assignments from your student throughout the entire year. If you teach juniors, most likely this will be even more important because you're going to be a popular letter writer. And if you have time, and I am not saying that you do, if you can jot down a note when it happens and keep that filed away for a future letter of recommendation, it might save you time in the end. Another tip is to write whenever you can. Don't wait until October. Now, there's no helping this if you're getting requests in October, but I would also argue that you should also have your own boundaries and be able to say no when you need to. Encourage your students to start thinking about who's going to write their letters of recommendation, and maybe collaborate with the school counseling office so that students don't wait until the last minute to make those requests. And finally, maybe share ideas with colleagues. So I've seen a lot of crowdsourcing of phrases. This often happens at private schools where school counselors will include quotes from individual teachers just to sort of demonstrate their point. But you can also overdo that, and sometimes it just becomes a long list of quotes, so you want to avoid that as well. But getting others' perspectives on maybe a particular student, especially if they're applying to really selective schools, might be a helpful way for you to bring in others into your letter. Now, in closing and to recap, quality is better than quantity. Even if you're writing more than 20 letters in a given season, each one can matter. There have been instances where letters of recommendation absolutely stop me. I'm reading what I consider sort of an average student, and then a letter of recommendation really blows me out of the water and makes me think. Now, that's probably pretty exceptional, quite honestly, and not the norm, but it can happen. You're not selling or convincing, you are offering insight. I know it can feel like high stakes. You want to do the very best that you can for your student. You also might be getting pressure from your school, or maybe your school counselor, or the parent, or even the student themselves. Just remember, the student is the student, and you are only sharing your perspective. Don't overthink your writing. Authenticity reads best. Some of the very best letters that I've read were written in a very straightforward way, and they got to the point right away. Colleges can tell when a teacher really knows and respects a student. We can also tell when you have some reservations, even when you don't come out and say what those reservations specifically are. Sometimes we can sort of read between the lines. In short, you don't need to write a perfect letter, just an honest human one. That's what really stands out. And just remember, your letter is part of a much larger file and narrative that your student is submitting. I hope that this is a helpful video and that you'll consider sharing this with colleagues. A massive thank you for all of the work that you do to support your students on their college admissions journey. For all of my viewers, I'll see you in the next video.